Look at me.
Sure.
Look at me.
Sure.
I'm the captain now.
All right, we've all seen this movie scene or meme from Captain Phillips, but what if I told you pirates off the coast of Somalia went from raking in 400 million in ransoms to then absolutely nothing? And what if I told you the incident of Captain Phillips isn't just rare anymore, but it never happens? But how did piracy just stop? Did we bomb them? Did we send in our military? Did we send in Chuck Norris? What if I told you it was none of the above, but something no one on the public stage is willing to admit? But before I tell you how Somalian piracy died, you need to know the origin story and how powerful they became. Between April of 2005 and December of 2012, Somalian pirates claimed over 400 million in ransom. That is crazy. This was their peak, like Tim Tebow with Florida from 07 to 09. They were unstoppable because there was little intervention and attention from world leaders. But suddenly, everything stopped around 2012, just like that. So to better understand how the Horn of Africa became pirate haven and then saw hundreds of millions of dollars stolen to nothing, we need to go back in time to really understand this. All right, so let's rewind the tape to the early 1990s, because pirates off the coast of Somalia wasn't like your Captain Jack Sparrow and Blackbeards off the Caribbean, raiding ports, stealing ships, and looking for treasure. In fact, Somalia wasn't just falling apart in 1991. It had just fallen into disarray. One of my relatives who was in the military was just stationed there in the last few years out in Somalia. And in his words, he puts it, Somalia makes Kensington, Philadelphia, the land of zombies, look like Bel Air, California. So real quick, if you haven't already, go check out a video on the Kensington. But that gives you a real glimpse of how terrible Somalia has become from this point. So in 1991, the central government of Somalia completely collapsed. President Siad Barre, who had ruled with an iron fist for over 2 decades, was overthrown by rebel factions. But instead of peace, his fall opened a power vacuum, kind of like what we saw in Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. What would follow was total state failure. No president, no police, no national army. In his place, warlords, clans, militias. Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, turned into a battlefield. Rival groups carved up the city and the countryside. They controlled aid routes, they hijacked food shipments, they turned famine into a weapon on these people. And while the world debated what to do, Somalians were starving. So in 1992, the United Nations authorized a humanitarian mission, not war, to deliver aid and stabilize the country. The US joined and then led that mission. President George Bush I launched Operation Restore Hope in December of '92, just weeks before leaving office. Then came old Bill Clinton, and Bill inherited the mission and expanded its scope. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Huge favor. Looking at the data right now, most people that watch are new subscribers, which is fantastic. However, they're not hitting the subscribe button. If you hit that subscribe button, it goes a long way to pushing the videos into the algorithm so more eyeballs can see it. So thank you guys. I appreciate you. If you can already, just put it to your watch later playlist and make sure to also like and leave a comment. So back to the video. So US troops were now not just protecting food aid, they were trying to capture warlords, especially one named Mohammed Farah Adid, who was seen as the most powerful and violent leader in that area. And this is where things began to unravel. In October of 1993, US forces launched a raid in Mogadishu to capture Adidi's top lieutenants. What was supposed to be a quick mission turned into a disaster that made national headlines. If you ever seen the movie Blackhawk Down? Yes, this is what I'm talking about. In fact, to hear a detailed breakdown of what actually happened, I'd go listen to Tom Satterley on the Sean Ryan podcast. He did a 3-part series, incredible detailed breakdown that gives you little nuggets of information the movie never touches on, and also provides so many behind the scenes intel that will give you goosebumps of how intense and sad the situation was. So quickly give you a rough breakdown. Blackhawk Down was when 2 Blackhawk helicopters were shot down, 18 American soldiers were killed, hundreds of Somalians died in the crossfire. Bodies of US troops were dragged through the streets, and images that were broadcasted worldwide. After that, Bill decided to pull us out while the UN eventually followed. And ultimately, we left Somalia to burn. They became a lost cause. So by 1995, every international force had packed up and left. Somalia was now completely ungoverned, both on land and at sea, as you'll see. And that's when another kind of theft began: foreign fishing fleets. From Europe, Asia, even the Middle East, they began entering Somalia waters illegally and without permission. They dragged massive nets through coral reefs. They scooped up tuna, lobster, and shrimp meant for the local markets, but instead they were being overfished, taken back to these other places to be sold. And others overfished the entire zones. Some even dumped toxic waste. And after the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, this is where things went south quickly. The toxic waste that was being dumped made it to shore, and investigations into this concluded that enough toxic waste had made its way to the Somalian people that it was actually affecting the health of the local population. This was making Somalia a pressure cooker for desperation and the desperation actions to follow. So the people who first noticed, fishermen in coastal towns in Ely and Haradiri. These men had no navy to call, no government to report to. No one cared because they were in crisis. Their boats sat idle, their children went hungry, so they did what they could. They decided to fight back. First with sticks and rifles, then with speedboats and AK-47s. So it seemed like this was Somalians trying to protect their region and making sure other countries respected their waters. But when a country collapses, it has a power vacuum, and you're left with literal warlords that pillage, rape, and kill their people and only want resources. They're quickly going to catch on to the tactics of what they're doing with these fishermen. And a great example is, imagine a cargo ship is leaving Dubai, the UAE. It's sending its most lucrative export of crude oil to Durban, South Africa, where roughly 8.5 billion is brought every year, according to 2024. It's a 21-day trip, and along the way, you pass the Gulf of Aden next to the Suez Canal, one of the most important trade routes in the world. If you remember the Suez Canal, it got blocked, and we saw what happened there, if you can tell by this video.
More than a dozen ships are waiting to pass through the Suez Canal. That's one of the world's busiest trade routes.
Nearly 19,000 ships, on average more than 50 ships per day, passed through the canal last year. A man-made engineering marvel, the busy Egyptian shipping lane is the quickest maritime link between Asia and Europe.
But this area is where things go wrong. You're the captain of your ship. You literally just left Dubai. Better yet, you're Captain Phillips, and you see these high-speed boats coming from the coastline off Somalia a few days into the journey. You think maybe other fishing vessels, but then you hear fire. AK-47s waving in the air, pointing your direction. Pirates. They speed up along your ship. You don't carry weapons, but all you have is water pumps to keep them at bay. Super effective, right? No. Well, these Somalians come prepared. They have a ladder, and they are attempting to board your ship. And all you can do is shoot high-powered water. According to international laws, you can't carry weapons on these ships, which obviously makes it very difficult to scare off these pirates that are trying to take your supplies or hold you ransom. So, what is the procedure to deal with the pirates? They're told, put some barbed wire around the ship. Have a safe room so you all can escape to. All basic things that really end up not being effective when you have guys with AK-47s with nothing to lose. So eventually, these pirates latch on and climb on board. Before you know it, they are gathering you all into the main hangar of the ship and demanding to call your superiors. They want money, and you're being held for ransom. Sometimes they're even torturing you and videotape for the entire world to see and put pressure on these companies to give the pirates the millions of dollars that they want. And they'll do it through public mutilations with their captives. And the time it takes for them to get paid, sometimes it's a week. Most of the time though, it's a few months to a year. This not only wrecks the economies of South Africa and the UAE and puts everything on hold, it makes shipping one of the most famous trade routes impossible to maneuver and extremely risky now. A famous case of this was the story of Michael Scott Moore. He was a journalist who was kidnapped for 977 days in nearly 3 years before being released for a $1.6 million ransom. He was on Joe Rogan, so I'd go check out that podcast to hear his story. But these so-called pirates that were being called at the time the Volunteer Coast Guard of Somalia, They were boarding ships demanding fees at first, but then they became pirates because they understood that the local warlords, they can make a bunch of money off this. So they started pouring in their money so they could give these pirates ships, supplies, weapons, anything they could. So it went from protection to piracy. So imagine some kid named Ahmed, he's from Puntland in the northeastern region of Somalia, born to a family of fishermen. As a kid, let's say in 2005, he's watched foreign fishing boats drift into waters his granddad taught him were theirs. He saw nets come in full of shrimp, tuna, lobster, and then he starts to see empty nets. It's now around 2007, 2008. The GDP of Somalia, 5.9 billion, which translates to one of the worst in the world. In fact, 147th out of 200 countries. The monthly average Somalians make is 110 bucks per month. That's nearly zero work, and when the only real source of income is fishing, that's where our buddy Ahmed begins to see something strange happen. His friends start disappearing, not fish anymore. They're being hired, and not for something else. They're being hired for piracy. He's hearing stories of huge ransoms. He's hearing stories of them making a bunch of money. So one day our buddy Ahmed sees a pirate skiff pull alongside him, his small fishing vessel. They offer him a chance. Guard this mothership, get a cut. He wants to say no because he knows stealing is not right. But when food is scarce and when boats can't go out because of the storms, when debt collectors are knocking, people's morals get tossed up to the side completely. And understandably so, because it becomes survival. That's what happened and is happening to the average kid in Somalia during this time. And this is why pirating became a way of life for them to just survive. So then by 2010, Somali piracy was at its peak. According to multiple sources, ransoms paid out in 2010 reached 238 million, with the average ransom per hijacked ship around 5.4 million. This is crazy money for Somalians, because the total cost of piracy to global maritime trade included insurance, rerouting ships, naval patrol securities, ranged from 7 billion to 12 billion per year during those worst years. So piracy was literally affecting our trading economy along the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. In 2011, they reached a high of 160 million from about 31 paid ransoms, averaging, like we said, 4.97 million. Ships being targeted weren't small anymore. It were tankers, oil carriers, cargo ships, sometimes even ships like a Ukrainian one caught with weapons that got Russia involved. A great example of one was a very large crude carrier, Irene SL. It was held for a huge ransom, reportedly of 13.5 million in 2011. Meanwhile, the number of attacks rocketed. In first 9 months of 2010, Somali pirates were behind about 44% of nearly 300 piracy incidents globally. As more ships got hit, more hostages were being taken. In 2011 alone, over 1,200 hostages were held captive, many held for months, like we said. And imagine the psychological and physical cost was just massive at this time. So the International Chambers of Commerce are reporting all this, and it becomes very clear that there is an organization strategy. Pirates were treating this like a business. So over time, Somalian pirates got smart. They built a structure. They got investors, financiers, which were what? The local elites, warlords who provided the speedboats, the fuel, the weapons, and other supplies. This was a cash cow. What else? You then had recruiters and captains who were organized missions, raised crews. Famous one was Hobyo Haradir. He was the cartel led by Mohammed Abdi Hassan. Afween is another example. These groups competed and sometimes fought each other. Because of course it's warlords, so not everyone's on the same page. They're wanting to fight over the loot. Because again, we're talking about a country in disarray. There's no central government, just warlords all over the place fighting each other for resources and power. You also start to see a technical crew with GPS operators, radio operators, negotiators who spoke English, Somali, and even Arabic. People of the towns and locals were all involved. It was a business for them. Piracy was a way out of the desperation of starving and being taken advantage by other countries. And over time, of course, the tactics evolved. First attacks near the coast, then farther out in the Gulf of Aden in the Indian Ocean. And a lot of the time, these ransoms were demanded based on ship value, cargo, nationality. Some of the iconic cases and wild stories that we saw from a lot of these raids, the first one being Captain Phillips and the Alabama in 2009. There were 4 pirates. They got in a lifeboat. It was a 5-day standoff. They had Navy SEALs intervene. This incident turned into a movie, but there were dozens more just like this. You had the Korean operated supertanker, hijacked in April, released in November for a ransom of $9 to $9.5 million. The cargo it had, crude oil worth tens or hundreds of millions. So this is when global power starts to notice. Shipping costs were rising, insurance skyrocketing, trade routes were being disrupted, major navies were deployed. EU set up Operation Atalanta. NATO, US, China, India, and others sent warships, patrol planes, patrol zones, convoy system, maritime arms. These made attacks harder and riskier. Ships started hiring private maritime security contractors, armed guards on ships. They had razor wire, safe rooms, sonic deterrents, things that were trying to delay it more, but those vessels had much lower risk of being successfully hijacked, as we notice. And world leaders pretty much telling these massive ship cargoes, it's up to you guys to figure it out. However, there's one country that really found the solution. This one country that depended on seafaring imports to keep it thriving, as well as exporting crude oil. That was the UAE. The UAE wanted to do something about it. So who did they call in since no one else was helping? They looked at the Rolodex of contacts. They found Mr. Eric Prince, founder of Blackwater Private Mercenary Company, and also the Unplugged iPhone, and former Navy SEAL. So according to Prince, the UAE and him had a meeting where they asked him to not be directly involved, but to consult. So they weren't sure what to do, and they said just give them a layout of how and why to do this. So Prince proposed and organized the Puntland Maritime Police Force, the PMPF, in 2010. The idea was to create a local force, trained, paid with local oversight, but backed by private firms and foreign funding, like we said, the UAE and some others, but primarily them. So Prince organized this in northern Somalia and Puntland. Puntland was a hub for piracy operations. It's right there next to the Gulf of Aden. So the plan was simple in his eyes. He said the newly trained Puntland Maritime Police Force, the PMPF, was then going to be established in 2011, and they were going to use Sterling Corporate Services, which was a private mercenary company based in Dubai, the UAE. So that made things a little bit easier since they weren't American-based and they had to go through the bureaucracy. And the way this deal got struck between the UAE and Somalia was thanks to Eric and his friend Michael Shanklin, a former CIA station chief in Mogadishu. According to a confidential report, take this as you will, by the African Union, Eric Prince was at the top of the management chain, Saracen, and provided the seed money for the Saracen contract. Michael Shanklin served as an advisor to then Somali government and helped broker the negotiations between the two so that way they could end piracy once and for all. Eric Prince said it wasn't hard. Like a wasp, a problem, you don't keep killing the wasps that are bothering you. You go to the root of the issue. You find the nest and you torch the damn thing. All these little pirate vessels had to be coming from somewhere. And you don't need satellite imagery or fancy technology. All you had to do, he said, was literally fly a King Air and find places where there are boats not in fishing ports, and that were most likely pirates. This is where Eric hit the bullseye on the target. You now take control of the Somalian pirate logistics. So here's how the pirates worked. They take their little pungas out in skiffs to the cargo ship. They capture it. They then bring it in closer to the shore. They might have somewhere from 3 to 6 cargo ships at a time, and they sit on the ship with the crew holding them ransom, and these pirates would then wait 6 to 12 months before the ransom was officially paid. So step 1, you cut off their ability to get paid. You make it so these pirates can't get paid, which in turn can't buy food, which eventually leave them nothing else to do but give up. They didn't use no hit squad, no assassins, just taking advantage of the holes and applying pressure on them. What's crazy is how Eric came up with this idea. He read this book, The Pirate Coast, which divulges into the pirate issue from 1803 to 1805, where the Libyan pirates or the Barbary pirates were causing havoc for trade ships. So how did America handle this issue? Same way the UAE and Somalia. They hired out an American mercenary to take care of business. As stated in the famous Marine Corps hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, history doesn't repeat itself, it just rhymes. However, there were, of course, a lot of conflicts because the company that was hired to train these people, the Saracen International Sterling Corporate Services, had allegations rise saying they were misusing the funds, unclear command structure, violation of arms embargo, reports of abuse during training. Apparently, one trainee was reportedly hogtied and beaten and died of injuries per the UN group, which Sterling disputed. So I have no idea who's really telling the truth or not. But remember, at this time, I will make the point that Blackwater incident and private mercenaries were seen as the lowest of low, and they were an easy target for US politicians, so everyone kind of hated them. So long story short, what happened to the Puntland Maritime Police Force? The private navy that Eric Prince helped build to fight Somalia pirates, it didn't disappear, it kind of morphed. What started out as a pirate fighting force became Puntland's all-purpose security force because they really needed something. After the pirates backed off, the PMPF shifted to chasing terrorists, now no longer in the sea but landwise. It now runs coastal patrols, intercepts illegal fishing boats, and has boots on the ground fighting Islamic State cells in the mountains of northern Somalia. It even took part in Operation Hilak, a 2024 campaign to push ISIS out of the buried region. But the PMPF isn't just patrolling the sea anymore. They've been used in raids, internal security ops, and political crackdowns. It operates in legal gray zones with shaky funding, often reports directly to Puntland's president instead of the federal Somali government. It's not really a maritime force anymore. It's more like a private army. So now that we better understand why the piracy started and why it ended, after 2020, it pretty much dropped, but it wasn't permanent peace. So by the 2020s, piracy has resumed in smaller ways. Fishing vessels, expired license, opportunistic kidnappings. Most recently, in December 2024, Somali pirates hijacked a Chinese-owned fishing vessel with 18 crew, demanding $10 million in ransom. Also, shipping insurance rates are creeping up again. With regional instability, conflict in Yemen, the Houthi attacks, Somali internal politics, naval patrols are thinning out, and despite many ships now hiring security with actual armored guys aboard, pirates will always find openings. So the private army idea, when it's not fully controlled, transparent, there's always going to be risks. Militias can slip into being political tools, power plays, clan wars, or shadow revenue streams. So what's the truth behind the rise and the fall of the pirates? And I guess a little bit of rise right now is pirates weren't just criminals wandering the seas. They were entrepreneurs born out of voids, economic voids, governance voids, legal voids. They made money, lots of money. And for a while, the world let them grow and didn't do anything about it. Then something interesting happened. The rise of private forces, mercenaries, regional security farms, actors like Eric Prince, firms like Saracen backing from the UAE. When naval fleets weren't enough, business interests, foreign governments, private capital stepped in with mixed results. Sometimes stabilizing, sometimes just shifting the risks. But looking at the origins, when a country collapses and everything goes south, your country is full of warlords and crime. The oceans you use to fish to bring in some sort of income are being abused by other countries. And then you also have people dumping in toxic waste, which ends up killing your people and destroying the health and economy of the place. So the Somalians were shoved into a corner where they literally had no choice but to survive. Now, does this excuse piracy? Absolutely not. But you have to understand why this became a thing and how eliminating it doesn't really get to the wasp nest of a disaster of Somalia. So here's the question you should leave with. When governments collapse or when people feel abandoned by their institutions, who fills the gap? And when those gap fillers have power, funding, and weapons, what prevents them from becoming the next problem? The pirate gold rush off Somalia is over, but what came after may be its most dangerous legacy. So this is the rise and the fall of the pirates. My name is Alessi. Please like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.